Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Stephanie Bree. Today I'm talking about miniature warfare and miniature figurines in tabletop wargaming and tabletop role-playing games. You could extend this to tokens and board games if you wanted to, but that's a stretch, so don't stretch it that far. But let's talk about miniature war games. I have to be upfront and honest. I do not have more than a surface level familiarity with miniature wargaming. I know my D&D history, and so I know that Dungeons and Dragons was originally an offshoot of a war game called Chainmail, which is itself an offshoot of older war games. So Dungeons and Dragons, and by extension, modern tabletop role-playing games, come from miniature war games. This is why, especially D&D in particular, but other tabletop RPGs as well, utilize miniature figures and a hexagonal map, very reminiscent of what you would have used in a miniature battlefield. This is why we do this. We use minis because our game came from minis. However, I have played a game of Chainmail. I downloaded the PDF. I read the rules as best as I could. And using my knowledge of Dungeons and Dragons and extrapolating what I didn't know about Chainmail, me and my nephew sat down and we played a campaign of Chainmail once. And I have a limited experience with the Star Wars X-Wing game and the most popular miniature war game, Warhammer 40K. I did live with a woman a few years ago who was really into miniature war games, and she had a bunch of them, not just those two. She had a ton of them. Holy shit. Way too fucking many of them for me. I was overwhelmed. But she did get me into X-Wing, so I do have a full set of X-Wing ships and pieces, and I have the whole game. I could sit down and play a campaign of X-Wing right now if I wanted to. I could dig out the pieces and play. Personally, my interest was more in the warships, not the fighters. So I never did get into and I don't remember what it's called, so forgive me. I didn't get into the game with the big ships, but that's the one I wanted to play. I just didn't have the money to buy Star Destroyers and Corellian cruisers, etc., etc. I didn't have that kind of money. You know, X-Wings and TIE Fighters are relatively cheap in comparison. So, yeah, I can have a whole fleet of TIE Fighters and, I'm good to go. However, my experience with 40K is fairly limited. She did take me to the miniature wargame shop, which I was in Dallas at the time, so that's a mega city. So they did have a miniature wargame store, which only sold miniature wargame pieces. This wasn't a comic book shop that sold 40K stuff. This was a miniature wargame store that only sold miniature. So they had World War II minis, they had pirates and pirate ship minis, they had Revolutionary War minis and Civil War minis, etc. They had all those other fantasy and sci-fi mini games too, that I was overwhelmed to learn that there were that many in existence. I have a very strong interest in minis. Some of this goes back to my affinity for model trains, specifically the HO scale model trains, which are in the same scale as most of your wargame minis are anyways. They're in the similar scales. So my interest is in, I like HO scale model trains, and I love Dungeons and Dragons, and I have a lot of D&D minis, so why not give Warhammer a try? Now, I was not willing to invest $100 in a starter box to get started on Warhammer, so my sister gave me a starter box that she had lying around that she didn't need anymore, that had an assortment of pieces and figures to try out. She didn't give it to me. She loaned it to me, I should say. She loaned it to me so that I could, identify the figures, read the book, learn the game, etc. So I was able to at least get a surface level familiarity with 40K. And to be honest, it's not a bad game. If I had the money and the time and the friends to play with, I could definitely see myself investing somewhat in 40K. So other mini war games I'm interested in. I am very interested in the pirates, the old pirate ships and stuff like that. So a pirate war game, pirate era war game would interest me. I am interested in medieval war games, so chainmail or something like chainmail would definitely interest me. I'm an American and I have an affinity for World War II, so a World War II campaign would interest me, as would a Revolutionary War, and even a Civil War campaign would probably interest me as well, somewhat. As far as sci-fi stuff goes, I would limit myself to Star Wars and Star Wars related stuff, so no Star Trek minis if they exist, and none of the, like, I would say original sci-fi stuff outside of 40K, which 40K is more fantasy based than science fiction based. And I know Warcraft, the video game, was a mini war strategy, a strategy game based on tabletop war games. But I don't know, so correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if there are any physical sets, pieces of minis in the Warcraft world to recreate Warcraft or StarCraft battles. I don't know if those exist. I can't say I would be interested in them if they did or do exist. And anything in the fantasy horror realm that includes skeletons and zombies and liches and ghouls and ghosts and things like that, vampires and werewolves, etc., would absolutely interest me. Absolutely would interest me. So that's where I am on minis and miniature war games. I do own an assortment. I'm not going to put a number on it because I don't know. I haven't sat down and count. But I do own an assortment of official D&D minis, various ones, and I will continue to buy various D&D minis based on what I want to own. Usually monsters. I like to own the monsters, but also some of the player character types. So, I have a fighter mini, I have a druid mini, a thief mini, a wizard mini, things like that. Your main characters I would like to have an assortment of. But I do not play Dungeons & Dragons with minis. I play Theater of the Mind. So if I go to a game session where they're playing with minis, I will put my piece on the board and move it around, as everyone else will. But I'm going to still describe my actions and everything that I'm doing Theater of the Mind style, and I'm not going to look at the board beyond what where putting my piece where it needs to be. I'm still going to imagine the playing field as the dungeon master describes it. And if the dungeon master is a piece of shit who can't describe anything and instructs me to just look at the board, I don't play with that dungeon master ever again. I won't go back to that game. I'll be like, no, dude, it's your job to describe it to me so I don't have to look at the goddamn board. Because it's not a fucking board game. This is one of the reasons why I do not like virtual tabletops. Because I don't want to have to look at the map and the board and whatnot. I want to be able to see it in my mind and imagine myself in the action. Because that's what drew me to Dungeons & Dragons in the first place. The shared storytelling aspect. So to me, even though D&D has its origins in miniature wargaming, I prefer to play it as far removed from miniature war games as possible. This is one of the reasons why I'm not a fan of 4th edition, which is basically the D&D miniature war game edition.